Welcome back, everybody. This Week in America, Coast to Coast. Thank you for joining us on the program today. The new book by Peter McNeela, M.D., the critically acclaimed The Lost Son, A Rock and Roll Road to Redemption, and True American Parable, chronicles his transformation from perennial honor student to miserable physician, to hopeful seeker and repentant sinner, to ultimately a confident writer who found his voice in the great American West, returned home with a newfound purpose. Dr. McNeela was born and raised in Buffalo, New York, outstanding high school athlete and scholar, a summa cum laude graduate of Canisius College with a B.A. in biology, a graduate of the University of Buffalo School of Medicine, a master's in public health from the University of Buffalo, a family medicine intern, college science teacher, a consumer safety inspector for the U.S. Department of Agriculture, a huge music fan and concert goer, attended Woodstock 94, today pursuing his dream of being a published author. His book, The Lost Son, A Rock and Roll Road to Redemption and True American Parable, one man's unique quest for his identity and redemption. Peter McNeela, M.D., with us on This Week in America. Peter, welcome to the program. It's great to have you with us.
Thanks, Rick. It's great to be here.
There is so much to cover in the course of the book in your life, and let's set the background, which is the basis for the story. And it's interesting, I mentioned some of that. You were basically an all-American son, an all-American young man during the early days growing up in Buffalo. You had success written all over you.
Yes, I would say I had a very good childhood. I lived almost my entire life in Buffalo, except for 1 year when I did my medical residency in Erie, Pennsylvania, and for 4.5 months when I had a job in Baltimore. But I grew up middle-class family. My father was a psychiatric nurse for 37 years. My mother had an informal daycare center right in our home, so I was exposed to children all the time from when I was young. And so, growing up, I went to Catholic elementary school. I went to Catholic church. Then I went to Canisius High School, which is one of the most prestigious high schools in the Buffalo, New York area. It is a Jesuit, all-boys Catholic school that has produced a lot of famous people, both nationally and influentially in the Western New York area. Right. There, I was a 4-year player on the football team, 2 years of JV, 2 years of varsity, and I was all Catholic my senior year at nose tackle. Academically, I graduated second in my class, which was quite an accomplishment considering the academic standards at the school. From there, I got a full scholarship to Canisius College, which is also a Jesuit college in Buffalo. And as part of my scholarship, I worked for 4 years as a research assistant, directly with the chairperson of the biology department, doing in vitro enzyme immunoassays. And we even published a couple of papers on the research. So with all this academic success that I had all through elementary school, high school, college, I decided that what I wanted to do was to become a physician, because not only did I have a great aptitude for science, but I also, growing up in the Catholic Church, growing up in Catholic schools, part of that, was service to others. I mean, I was required, everyone was required to do community service senior year of high school. And so I just thought that medicine was the perfect blend of an academically or intellectually,
Yeah, this was something.
Career.
Yeah, you were good at science, and here's your chance to actually, because of the Catholic education, you felt the need to reach out to other people. You talk in the book, The Lost Son, A Rock and Roll Road to Redemption and True American Parable. Peter McNeela, our guest on the program, you talk in the book about, you're like 17, and you decide this is what you would like to do. Things go well at first in medical school, and you mentioned the fact that you were able to get a full 4-year ride for college. You go to medical school, and things changed once you got into the clinical part of that. Talk about that, because at that point, you're sort of second guessing yourself and thinking maybe I didn't know what I was getting myself into.
Yes, exactly. Despite the fact that my father was a psychiatric nurse, I was the first one in my family to go to medical school, let alone become a doctor. And so I did have a bit of a naive understanding of what being a doctor really is, because my only real exposure, I was a very healthy kid. I was never hospitalized my entire childhood. So my only exposure really was through my pediatrician and, just seeing, being in doctor's office, for outpatient visits. And so just to give your listeners and viewers some background about the whole process of becoming a physician, medical school is 4 years, but the first 2 years and the second 2 years are very different. The first 2 years are very much classroom and laboratory based.
And you did very well with those. You did very well in the beginning, yes.
The first 2 years was really just an extension of college for me. But when you get into the second 2 years of medical school, it's all clinically oriented. You're doing rotations either in hospitals, clinics, or doctors' offices. And over those 2 years, my third and fourth year of medical school, I discovered a very sharp distinction between working in the outpatient setting versus working in the inpatient setting. I was very good seeing patients in clinics and doctors' offices, taking histories, doing physical exams, managing, relatively either minor or chronic illnesses. But when he actually got into the hospital and doing rotations like surgery and OBGYN and just being in the emergency room and in the ICUs when you're dealing with either very traumatically injured patients or patients who are critically ill, that's what I didn't like. And the thing is, before I graduated from medical school, I did a 7-week rotation with a community family medicine doctor who told me, we developed a great rapport. He told me, go do your residency, wherever, and then come back and work with us. And I was thrilled, because that's all I really wanted to do, was to work in a family medicine group practice. But in order to get from point A to point B, you have to go through those 3 years,
yes,
or 4 years, depending on what specialty of medicine you're going to go into. That is almost entirely hospital-based. And so when I graduated from medical school, I did fantastic on the medical licensing exam, which is also referred to as the medical boards that you have to pass in order to get your license. Academically, intellectually, knowledge-wise, I did, I had it all. It's just that when I got into medical residency, and at the particular hospital that I worked at, the first-year residents oftentimes worked 80 to 100-hour work weeks. We were required to work 34-hour shifts every 4 days. And I just, in combination with the incredible stress of making critical life and death decisions, like on a dime, over the course of that year, I just became extremely depressed. I was full of anxiety. It got to the point where it was just my mental health. I could not even make decisions because I had so much worry about harming the patients.
Well,
I call it paralysis by analysis.
Yeah, and you talk about that in great detail in the book, The Lost Son, A Rock and Roll Road to Redemption and True American Parable. Peter McNeela, that's M-C-N-E-L-A, is our guest on This Week in America. The book is available wherever books are sold around the country. You can go to Amazon. You can link on directly on our website, thisweekinamerica.us, or go to Peter's website. Information on the book and a lot of other information there that we'll talk about during the course of the program, McNeela.com. That's petermcneela.com. It's interesting, as I'm reading the book, I understand, especially in the early days as you're going through the residency, it's more than just medical knowledge. It's really an endurance test, isn't it, for young doctors?
Yes, it very much is. I mean, I didn't quite know what I was getting myself into when I was 18, 19 years old and decided to become a doctor. And, I had the knowledge, I had the intelligence
Yes.
to be a doctor, but when you actually get into residency and, you're working these, there'd be nights when you'd be up the entire night with the pregnant patient who's in labor, and for you to work like a 24-hour shift without any sleep, and then you still have to work another 10 hours after that, it was like being a zombie.
Well, you hear these stories and you wonder intellectually, how can you function during a period like that? That's 36 hours. I'm sure you have ups and downs during that period. At the same time, you're seeing patients, and as you said, on a dime, making decisions. How difficult is that?
Oh, I found it extremely difficult. As the year went on, as a family medicine resident, we still, no matter what rotation we were doing, we still had to see our own patients in the family medicine center like 2 afternoons a week. And my mind was so distracted by what would be going on in the hospital that I could barely even focus on what I was doing in the family medicine center right there with the patients that I was actually with. And so it just got to the point where, even my strengths as a physician, which had always been on the outpatient side, everything just got to me to where I was at the point of having a nervous breakdown.
And you talk about being led to a premature death, the substance abuse issues, depression, but it was maybe a step beyond that, because what you described as constant suicidal thoughts.
Yes, for the first maybe 5-6 months, I was trying to get over the anxiety, with alcohol. But it got to a point where I realized that if there was any chance for me to actually succeed, I needed to start seeing a psychiatrist. I needed to start seeing a psychologist and getting on antidepressant medication and psychotherapy. And what I learned from my psychologist actually was that he had treated many doctors and medical residents at the same facility that I was at. And what I learned is that mental health issues with doctors and healthcare workers are actually very common. But he also said that I was practically off the charts. But I also do have a family history of anxiety and depression as well.
And you go into that in detail in the book. The book is The Lost Son, A Rock and Roll Road to Redemption and True American Parable by Dr. Peter McNeela, our guest on the program. His website is petermcneela, McNeela.com. You make the decision, and for the first time in your life, you felt like you failed at something. You make the decision to leave the medical residency. And a while later, you decide you're going to go on the trip. Let's talk about that decision to go on the trip. It's fascinating what went on during this trip and how it saved your life. And the book is the result of that. And you described the time you sat down with your parents and you said, "Mom and Dad, we need to have a talk." And you were explaining to them you needed to take this break and to go away. Talk about that whole decision.
Well, first of all, there was the decision to leave medicine, which was very hard because I put so much time, money, and effort
Yes.
into college and medical school. And, when I made that decision, I had to, because I was on the verge of committing suicide. The main reason why I didn't was because actually my sister was going to be getting married. And I just could not do that to my sister and my mother. I just knew the tremendous grief that would cause them. So it's almost like I didn't even care about my life. It just seemed like my life was ruined. But it was like my sister's wedding is what, at least initially, got me through that, period of intense suicidal ideation. I came back home after leaving medical residency. For about a year, I tried different things. I even went back to school for a semester, looking into research as a possibility. But I just didn't feel like it was really leading me to where I want to go. And so I came up with this idea that I really felt like I needed to just get away from the distractions of everyday life. I have a great family, a big extended Italian family on my mother's side, but I just felt like I needed to get away. I needed to be alone and just really do some intense, deep meditating and a look at my strengths, my weaknesses, what I wanted to accomplish in life. And so that's when I decided there just seemed to be, and I can't fully explain it, and I can't fully explain it in the book, but I just seemed to have this calling. I needed to go out to like Arizona and Utah and just get away from society even, and just really focus on why I'm here, what is my purpose, what is my meaning, and what am I going to do with the rest of my life?
And the timing was right because you described just before you left on the trip that you were literally at the end of your rope. And I'm thinking as I read the book, The Lost Son, what would have happened had you not decided to go on that trip? I want to talk about that trip and then the book that is really a unique look. And the book is something, the trip was something that really helped you. The book is something that by you sharing that journey will help a lot of other people. You described it as 3 wondrous weeks. Talk a little bit about that, and then we'll talk about what you called the turning point, July 30th of 1999. Talk about this trip because each stop along the way, you get a little closer to rejuvenation.
Yes, I mean when I left on my trip, I didn't know exactly where I was going to go. It's not like I had every single day planned out.
All right.
I had taken a side trip up to Bodcage, Ontario. After getting my car tuned up, I just wanted to make sure that everything was going to be set as far as my car goes. And I took out some AAA maps, and I kind of had a vague idea because I always wanted to see New Orleans and Las Vegas. Those were 2 cities I knew that I wanted to see on my trip. And I also knew that I wanted to go out to Utah and Arizona. But as I got onto my trip, I mean, every day was kind of left to spontaneity. It depended on how tired I was because obviously when you're spending hundreds of miles by yourself driving on a highway, you start to get fatigued. And so what I learned very quickly, before leaving, I bought a tent, I bought a flashlight, and I bought a lot of, food that I could just eat without refrigeration so that I had to do this on the cheap. I didn't have thousands and thousands of dollars to spend, so
Right.
I was, basically this was like a prolonged camping trip across the country. And it was actually on the 3rd night of my trip. I was down at a campground down in Alabama. It was not too far from Jackson. Jackson, Mississippi, not Alabama, Mississippi. And it was at a campground there that I started to just keep a travel diary. And again, it's something that I couldn't fully explain, but there was just this amazing feeling of catharsis that just came out from writing, from actually just getting my feelings out and putting it down on black and white on paper. And so from that night on, I very meticulously documented everything that happened on the journey. And within days, I felt like there was a lot of, to me at least, amazing things that were happening that I did not foresee at the start of the trip. And so basically by the halfway point of the trip, I really felt like I had a really good, it's a great story to tell, and it was it was my responsibility to keep track of it and then eventually turn that into a book.
Well, and that book will help a number of people. I mentioned this, what you describe as the turning point. We're talking about the book, The Lost Son, A Rock and Roll Road to Redemption and True American Parable by Peter McNeela, our guest in the program. Book's available at Amazon. You can go to our website, thisweekinamerica.us, and link on to all of that information. PeterMcNeela.com is his website. You're driving through, I think it's western Arizona, and you're listening to music. And I mentioned before the role that music has played in your life. You're listening to Tragically Hip, and you hear their song Grace 2. And you at that point sort of like burst into tears, and suddenly things started fitting together. And you're talking about that moment where you realize there's a difference between being in a good mood and true happiness. Was that where true happiness really entered your life?
Well, what I could say is that this also goes back to my faith.
Yes.
Also, is that I was a fervently religious person through high school, maybe into the start of college. But by the time I got to medical school, I stopped going to church. My faith in God, like many young people, my faith in God had pretty much dissipated.
Yes.
And so all through college, medical school, medical residency, I really was, this might sounds harsh but I was kind of spiritually and morally bankrupt. And as I got on this trip, and I just, did all this meditating and just seeing the natural world, and, by the time I got to the Grand Canyon, I just had this very intense kind of, spiritual reawakening. And, I do mention in the book that for a while there, I thought that maybe the purpose of this journey was to actually lead me to the priesthood. It's something that I had thought of when I was in high school, but had completely left my mind all through college and medical school. But I also, I knew what kind of commitment that was going to take, and so I just kind of, put that aside and said, let me get through Las Vegas and into Utah. And another thing that a very important influence in the book and in my life since then is that I took the book Mere Christianity by C.S. Lewis, and I read that while I spent 3 days in Utah. I went to Canyonlands National Park. I went to Arches National Park. Just absolutely gorgeous landscapes. And, at my campground site, I was reading, and I was just doing some very intense, meditating and thinking about, my purpose in life. And it was then that, my faith kind of became renewed, and I started to realize what it was that at least what I thought my purpose in life was to be.
And we see that transformation in the book, The Lost Son. A couple of minutes left in the program. I want to talk about the unique nature of the book. This, again, displays the influence that music has had in your life. The story is based on the model of a classic rock concept album. So if you think it's just going to be date and what you did on that particular day, you've got themes you use, music themes you use with each chapter, and this is really a very creative way to present your story.
Yes. On top of being a sports fan, an academic, I'm a huge music fan, especially of rock and blues music. And I got the idea. This came after my journey was over. One of my favorite subgenres of music is concept albums or rock operas. I'm a huge fan of The Who, like Tommy and Quadrophenia, or Pink Floyd's The Wall. So I came up with this idea of reconstructing my very rough travel diary that was just completely stream of conscious, and reconstructing it into a literary version of a 3-part rock opera where part one was my past. It was everything that happened before I went on my journey. So it covers, all my academic history and the year between medical residency and my decision to go on this journey. Part two then covers the present, which was the first half of my journey, where I basically just learned how to live again, because so much of my identity had been about being Dr. McNeela that I almost kind of forgot what the real Peter McNeela was.
Yes.
And then part three has to do with the future, and it has to do with after going through that transformation in the Great American West, about looking toward the future and what it was that I wanted to accomplish professionally.
The book is called The Lost Son, A Rock and Roll Road to Redemption and True American Parable by Peter McNeela. I'll give you all the information here in a second. A minute or so left in the program. Talk about who the book is designed for. I'm reading this, and this could really touch so many lives in a very positive way. Who would you like to reach with the book?
Well, I think anybody could read it. I
Yes.
mean, I've had women in their 70s, including my editor, who absolutely loved the book. But I can tell you that my real target audience is meant to be high school and college students. And the reason for that is, number one, I wanted to give them a realistic portrayal of what becoming a physician is like, especially for anyone who is a young, aspiring physician, to really know what the process is, because I didn't have that when I decided to go to medical school, and I wish I did, because I
Yes.
could have avoided putting myself $100,000 in debt and
Yes.
gone through
Wow.
a near suicidal experience. But also, the other thing is, after my journey, I in fact went back to school and got my master's in public health, and I just decided that if I wasn't going to be a physician, which focuses on individual patients, perhaps I could have just as much, if not a bigger, influence on society, or on especially youths, in using all my personal and professional experiences to educate them about the dangers of drug and alcohol use and unwanted /teen pregnancies and sexually transmitted diseases, because I saw many cases of those while I was in medical school and residency. And so in fact, in the last third of the book, I go into very specific patient cases, medical cases, as well as my own personal experiences that I've had, in order to try to prevent drug and alcohol abuse, which is a major problem these days.
That's
as
why.
well as suicides and.
Yeah, and you're so credible because you've been there. You've either experienced it or witnessed it firsthand. Our guest on the program is Peter McNeela, MD. That's McNeela, Peter McNeela, MD. The website for Peter is very simple, petermcneela.com. You can link on by going to our website, thisweekinamerica.us. The name of the book, and it's a fascinating read, is The Lost Son, A Rock and Roll Road to Redemption and True American Parable. Peter, I loved having a chance to read the book. It's great to have you with us on the program. Much success. Hopefully we can do this again. Thank you for being with us on the show today.
Oh, thank you very much, Rick. It was great.
Once again, the name of the book, The Lost Son, A Rock and Roll Road to Redemption and True American Parable. Peter McNeela, the author and our guest on This Week in America. His website, petermcneela.com. And, of course, information at our website, thisweekinamerica.us. Back after these messages.